September 1st, 1939. Before dawn, 62 German divisions and over 1,300 warplanes surge across Poland's borders, not just to conquer, but to prove a new kind of war can bring victory in weeks, not years. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a calculated experiment called Fallweis, designed to shock the world and shatter an entire nation. But how did Germany script a campaign so ruthless, so precise that Poland collapsed in just 35 days? The answer starts with the plans drawn up deep inside Berlin's war rooms. Inside the Reich Chancellery, Hitler's ambitions translated into orders and maps. By late August 1939, the plan codenamed Fallweis was finalized. It was not a vague directive, but a precise blueprint. 62 German divisions, supported by more than 1,300 aircraft, would strike Poland from 3 sides. The objective was clear: destroy the Polish army before it could fully mobilize, seize Warsaw as quickly as possible, and force surrender before France or Britain could intervene. The final order to attack was issued on August 31st, 1939. Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, worked late into the night overseeing the last adjustments to troop movements and supply lines. Army Group North under Fedor von Bock would advance from East Prussia and Pomerania. Army Group South, led by Gerd von Rundstedt, would drive northward from Silesia and Slovakia. A third, smaller force would press from the west. The plan called for rapid double envelopment. Armored spearheads would slice through Polish defenses, link up east of Warsaw, and trap entire armies in a tightening ring. The numbers behind the plan were staggering. Over 1.5 million German soldiers stood ready to cross the border. The Luftwaffe would field bombers, dive bombers, and fighters, tasked with destroying Polish airfields, railways, and communications from the first hour. The Navy, though limited, was ordered to blockade the port of Gdynia. Every branch had a role in the choreography of destruction. Speed was not just a preference, but an absolute requirement. Hitler's staff calculated that any delay could give the Western Allies time to react. The Wehrmacht's timetable left no room for hesitation. Halder's diary from August 31st, 1939 notes that all preparations were complete. The order was to attack at dawn. The objective was the complete destruction of the Polish army. Maps from Halder's staff show the intended axes of advance, arrows converging on Warsaw from the north, west, and south. The plan left little to chance. Reserve units were positioned to exploit breakthroughs or respond to unexpected resistance. Panzer divisions were dispersed for maximum flexibility, not massed in a single punch, reflecting the lessons of previous maneuvers and the realities of geography. The aim was to overwhelm, encircle, and annihilate, not simply to push the front line forward. Fallweis was more than a military operation. It was a testbed for Germany's new way of war, a campaign designed to validate the theories of rapid mechanized conflict that had been debated in staff colleges for years. Every movement, every timetable, every map was drawn with the expectation that this would be a war measured in days, not months. The fate of Poland and the credibility of Germany's military doctrine would be decided by the precision and speed of these opening moves. Heinz Guderian, a general with a passion for speed and machines, believed that victory in modern war depended on momentum and coordination. His theories, tested on German training grounds and spelled out in his book Achtung Panzer, now faced their first real test. Guderian and his fellow armored commanders did not see tanks as slow-moving support for infantry. Instead, they imagined panzer divisions as the spearhead, striking deep, bypassing strong points and unraveling the enemy's rear. But tanks alone could not deliver the shock needed to break an army. The Luftwaffe, under commanders like Wolfram von Richthofen, provided the other half of the equation. German aircraft swarmed over Poland's skies from the opening hour, not just bombing frontline positions, but hunting for railways, bridges, and columns far behind the lines. Dive bombers like the Ju-87 Stuka screamed down on Polish supply convoys, sowing panic and confusion. Within hours, Polish airfields were cratered, their aircraft destroyed or forced to flee. By the end of the first day, German pilots reported near total control of the air. What made this assault truly new was not just the hardware, but the way it was directed. German commanders relied on a dense network of radios installed in almost every tank and armored car. Orders could be relayed instantly from headquarters to advancing spearheads, and from spearheads back to headquarters. When a panzer division hit unexpected resistance, the commander could call for Stuka support, and within minutes, bombs would fall. If a gap opened in the Polish lines, infantry and motorized columns were redirected on the fly to widen it. This real-time communication allowed German units to adapt, exploit, and encircle, while Polish commanders, dependent on runners and telephones, struggled to keep up. Guderian's own corps, the 19th Panzer, set the standard. In the first week, his tanks and armored cars advanced nearly 200 miles, crossing rivers and smashing through roadblocks. The pace stunned both the defenders and the attackers. Halder's diary notes the astonishment in Berlin as reports arrived. Armored columns were already at the gates of Warsaw, far ahead of schedule. This was the Blitzkrieg in action, armored thrusts moving so quickly that Polish units found themselves surrounded before they could regroup. The Luftwaffe's role extended beyond the front. German bombers targeted bridges and rail junctions, slowing Polish mobilization and cutting off retreat. The chaos on the roads was compounded by columns of refugees fleeing the fighting, often bombed from above. German planners had calculated that if everything went right, their armies could reach Warsaw in 2 weeks. Guderian and his peers, using radio-coordinated movement and air-ground teamwork, did it in less than half that time. The mechanics of this new warfare, fast-moving armor, overwhelming air power, and split-second communication would soon be measured not just in miles gained, but in entire armies trapped and destroyed. For the first time, the world saw what Blitzkrieg looked like in practice: speed as a weapon, confusion as a tactic, and technology as the force multiplier that made it all possible. On September 9, 1939, as German armored columns pressed toward Warsaw, the Polish Poznan army under General Tadeusz Kutrzyba prepared a daring counterstroke along the Bzura River. For over a week, German spearheads had raced east, leaving their flanks exposed. Kutrzyba saw an opportunity. At dawn, nearly 100,000 Polish troops launched a surprise assault, catching elements of the German 8th Army off balance. Initial attacks drove the Germans back several miles, recapturing villages and forcing German units onto the defensive for the first time in the campaign. The counteroffensive was not just a last stand, it was a calculated effort to relieve pressure on Warsaw and reconnect isolated Polish formations. Kutrzyba's staff-coordinated infantry, cavalry, and the limited artillery still available, pushing westward toward Lowitz and Soshachev. For several days, the Polish advance gained ground, capturing prisoners and disrupting German supply lines. Reports from the front described columns of German trucks abandoned along muddy roads, their crews fleeing under Polish fire. But the momentum could not last. German command reacted with speed and precision. Reinforcements from the 10th Army, including mechanized units and close air support from the Luftwaffe, shifted north to contain the breach. German bombers pounded Polish positions along the riverbanks, scattering reserves and destroying bridges behind the attackers. The Luftwaffe's dominance in the air made every daylight movement costly for the Poles, while German radio coordination allowed for rapid redeployment of reserves. By September 13, 1939, Polish forces found themselves outflanked. German divisions closed in from the north and south, forming a tightening ring around the Bzura salient. Kutrzyba ordered a breakout toward Warsaw, but the escape routes narrowed with each passing hour. Rain turned the fields to mud, slowing columns of soldiers and refugees alike. German artillery shelled the river crossings, and Stuka dive bombers struck at any concentration of troops. By September 18, 1939, the fight was over. Nearly 170,000 Polish soldiers were taken prisoner, one of the largest single captures of the campaign. The defeat at the Bzura did not come from lack of courage or tactical skill, but from the overwhelming operational flexibility of the German command. The battle stands as a stark example. Even when Polish forces seized the initiative, the speed and coordination of the German response rendered isolated victories unsustainable. The road to Warsaw now lay open, but the cost for Poland was measured in lost armies and shattered hope. German divisions reached the outskirts of Warsaw on September 8th, the capital still crowded with civilians and retreating soldiers, braced for what was coming. By September 13th, the city was fully encircled. Roads leading out were cut by German armor and artillery, trapping more than 1 million people inside. The defenders, including soldiers, police, volunteers, and ordinary residents, organized barricades, dug trenches, and converted schools and churches into makeshift hospitals. Food and water supplies dwindled quickly as the siege tightened. Each day, the sound of artillery and the drone of bombers echoed across the city. The Luftwaffe escalated its campaign against Warsaw, shifting from military targets to systematic bombardment of the city itself. On September 24th, German command launched the largest air raid of the campaign. Over 1,150 aircraft flew wave after wave above the rooftops, dropping more than 1,000 tons of bombs. Fires raged through residential districts, hospitals, and historic landmarks. Survivors described the ground shaking, the sky black with smoke, and entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble in hours. The number of civilian casualties mounted, with hospital records and eyewitness accounts recording thousands injured or killed in a single day. Water mains burst under the bombardment, leaving firefighters powerless as flames spread unchecked. For those inside the city, the siege brought a constant struggle for survival. Families crowded into basements, rationing bread and collecting rainwater. Medical staff worked around the clock with dwindling supplies, treating wounds by candlelight. The city's defenders, outnumbered and exhausted, fought on as long as they could. But each day the situation grew more desperate, communications with the outside world broke down, and pleas for help went unanswered. On September 27th, after nearly 3 weeks of siege, Warsaw's exhausted defenders agreed to surrender. The decision came not just from military defeat, but from the unbearable toll on civilians, families buried in collapsed buildings, children lost in the chaos, and entire districts flattened. The fall of Warsaw ended organized resistance in the capital. For the German command, the capture of Warsaw was a symbolic and strategic victory. For the people of the city, it marked the beginning of a long and brutal occupation. Poland's defeat in 1939 began long before German troops crossed the border. The Polish military system was riddled with weaknesses that left it exposed from the outset. Mobilization lagged fatally behind events. On September 1st, only a portion of the army had reached its assigned positions. The government, hoping to avoid provoking Germany and still clinging to the possibility of diplomatic rescue, delayed full mobilization until August 30th. This hesitation caused days the country could not afford. As German forces advanced, Polish units were still assembling, many caught on trains or roads, vulnerable to Luftwaffe attacks. The defense plan itself was a gamble. Polish troops were spread thin along the entire border, trying to protect every region at once. This left little depth behind the front lines. When German armor punched through, there were almost no reserves to counter the breach, and retreat quickly turned chaotic. Marshal Edward Reed-Smigli, the commander-in-chief, ordered this posture under intense political pressure to defend the border and in the hope that Western allies would intervene. In practice, it played directly into German hands, exposing Polish armies to rapid encirclement. Communication breakdowns made matters worse. German divisions relied on radios in every tank and staff car, coordinating attacks and calling in air support within minutes. Polish commanders, by contrast, depended on couriers, telephones, and runners. As the front collapsed, headquarters lost contact with field units. Counterattacks like the one at the Besura were crippled by delays and confusion. Fragmented command only deepened as German advances cut railways and destroyed telephone lines. Many Polish units fought on, unaware that neighboring formations had already been overrun. The myth of Polish cavalry charging tanks is a distortion. Cavalry units, including the Uhlans, were trained for reconnaissance and flanking, fighting mostly as mobile infantry. There were no mass charges against armored columns. Instead, cavalry harassed German supply lines, adapting as best they could with limited resources. At its core, the collapse was structural. Mobilization delays, border deployment, fragmented command, and outdated communications left Poland unable to resist a modern, coordinated assault. On September 17, 1939, a new front opened without warning. Soviet troops crossed into eastern Poland, advancing along a broad front from the north at Vilnius to the southern city of Lwów. The Polish government, already battered by weeks of German assaults, now faced an overwhelming force from the east. Messages from Marshal Reed-Smigli to his remaining commanders were brief and grim: avoid contact with the Soviets, save what could be saved, and retreat toward Romania if possible. The hope of regrouping in the east vanished overnight. By September 18, 1939, the Polish president and senior officials crossed into Romania, effectively ending any centralized resistance. 2 days later, on September 19, 1939, German and Soviet officers met at Brest-Litovsk. The handshake between Wehrmacht and Red Army commanders on the city's main avenue was more than a photo opportunity. It was the practical division of Poland, agreed weeks earlier in secret. German units withdrew from the eastern districts, handing them to Soviet control. Polish soldiers caught between the two armies faced impossible odds. Some units attempted to fight through to Hungary or Romania, but most were quickly surrounded and disarmed. While the world watched, Britain and France remained on the sidelines. Both countries had declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, but their armies did not move. The so-called phony war had begun in the West, leaving Poland isolated. In Berlin, the lack of Allied intervention did not go unnoticed. Hitler's generals recorded their relief and surprise in private diaries. The campaign's rapid success, achieved in just over a month, seemed to validate every lesson of Blitzkrieg. Speed, shock, and coordination had delivered victory before the enemy could respond. Behind the scenes, German staff officers studied the campaign's weak points. Fuel shortages had nearly stranded panzer columns outside Warsaw. Traffic jams at river crossings delayed advances by days. But these problems were masked by the collapse of Polish resistance and the Soviet entry. For the Nazi leadership, the lesson was clear. With the right plan and enough daring, the Wehrmacht could defeat any opponent. The events of September 1939 set the stage for even greater ambitions and even greater risks. Blitzkrieg's success in Poland shattered illusions that distance or treaties could guarantee safety. Today, wars start faster than most can react, and civilians remain the first to suffer. The tactics forged here continue to shape military doctrine and headlines alike. In a world where speed decides fate, history's warnings grow more urgent. What lessons will we actually remember? Share your thoughts below.